A blue alien vanished from every galactic registry, yet someone found her farewell letter hidden in his sleeve. And the impossible part? She wrote it for the one species she was taught to fear. Tell me where you're watching from, and subscribe if you want more mysteries like this. The story begins now. The rain in Seattle had become a permanent resident by 2584, and Ethan Cole had learned to read its moods the way some men read stock markets. Today it was patient, almost apologetic, tapping gently against the corrugated roof of his dockside workshop, like an old friend asking permission to enter. He wiped his hands on a rag that had seen better decades and glanced at the wall clock. 11:47. She would arrive in 13 minutes. She always did. Ethan had stopped pretending he didn't notice. 6 months of Fridays had taught him that some patterns were stronger than habit. They were rituals, and rituals he'd learned during the war were what kept you sane when the world insisted on breaking. The workshop smelled of machine oil, coffee that had been reheated too many times, and something else he couldn't quite name. Hope, maybe, or its quieter cousin, anticipation. He moved to the small counter near the window, the one with the salvaged espresso machine he'd rebuilt from parts that shouldn't have worked together, much like the friendship that was about to walk through his door. At exactly noon, the bell above the entrance chimed. Carell stepped inside, her blue skin glistening with rainwater, silver eyes scanning the space with that particular carefulness that exile teaches. She wore the same gray coat she always did, practical and worn, the kind of thing that helped you disappear in crowds that didn't want to see you anyway. "The usual?" Ethan asked, though he'd already started preparing it. "Please." Her voice carried the musical quality common to Orions, but softened by months of learning to shape human words. "Though I must ask again, is it normal for melted cheese to move?" Ethan paused mid-motion, then caught the slight curve at the corner of her mouth. Humor. She'd been practicing. "Only the good stuff," he replied, sliding the grilled cheese sandwich onto a plate. "It means it's alive with possibility. Humans eat when sad," she said quietly, accepting the coffee he offered. "We starve when broken. Your way is kinder." The words hung in the air between them, heavier than they should have been. Ethan noticed her fingers trembling slightly as she wrapped them around the warm cup. She sat at her usual spot, the table near the back window that overlooked the shipyards. But today, something was different. The way she touched the worn wood of the table, running her fingertips along the grain as if memorizing its texture. The way she looked at the walls, the tools, the coffee-stained poster of pre-war Seattle, like someone taking photographs with their mind. Ethan returned to the engine mount he'd been working on, but his attention kept drifting. They'd developed an easy silence over the months, the kind that didn't need filling. But today's silence felt full of words neither of them knew how to say. "Do you ever miss flying?" she asked suddenly. He looked up. She was staring at the rain-streaked window, her reflection ghostly in the glass. "Every day," he admitted. "You?" "I was a medical officer. We did not fly, we healed." She paused. Or tried to. It was the most she'd ever said about her past. The sandwich sat untouched on her plate. The coffee cooled in her hands. As she stood to leave, earlier than usual, she turned back at the door. Her hand lingered on the frame, and she whispered something in Aryan, too soft for him to catch. Then she was gone, leaving only the scent of rain and the feeling that something irreplaceable had just shifted in the world. Ethan stared at the empty chair for a long moment before returning to his work. But the wrench felt heavier than it should have, and the rain sounded different now, like it was counting down to something. Ethan couldn't sleep that night. He found himself at the workshop's desk at 3 a.m, scrolling through transaction records on a screen that flickered with the unreliability of salvaged tech. Carell had been coming for 26 weeks. Not once had she paid in credits. Instead, she left things. A small crystal that hummed when touched, a data chip containing Orion folk songs, a piece of fabric that changed color with temperature. Each item sat in a drawer he'd labeled "Payment Pending," though he'd never asked her to settle the debt. He pulled out the first thing she'd ever left, 6 months ago, the day she'd stumbled into his shop during a storm that had knocked out half the city's power grid. She'd been soaked, shivering, her silver eyes wide with something beyond fear. Terror, maybe. The kind that came from knowing you were hunted. "Please," she'd said in halting English, "I need somewhere dry, just for an hour." He'd given her a towel and coffee that was too strong. She'd sat in the corner, silent as a ghost, until the storm passed. When she stood to leave, she'd placed a small metallic flower on the counter, perfectly rendered in blue-gold alloy. "For kindness," she'd said. He still had it, kept it on his desk where the morning light hit it just right. His comm unit buzzed, dragging him from the memory. A message from Marcus, his old squadron mate who now worked port security. "We need to talk. Now." The diner where Marcus liked to meet was the kind of place where conversations disappeared into the clatter of dishes and the hiss of the grill. They sat in a back booth, and Marcus pushed a datapad across the table without preamble. "Repatriation Protocol Sigma," Marcus said quietly. "It got approved last night." Ethan scanned the document, his chest tightened with each line. 72 hours, he breathed. They're giving them 72 hours. After the bombing last week, the council spooked. All Orion nationals have to report to processing centers by Sunday midnight. Marcus's jaw clenched. Processing centers, Ethan. You know what that means. Orbital detention camps, the kind with thin walls and thinner chances of survival. "Carell," Ethan said. "Is she the one who comes to your shop?" Marcus leaned forward. "The medical officer?" "How did you know she was medical?" "Because I pulled her file after I saw you two at the market last month." Marcus's expression softened. "Ethan, she was on the Velkarath, the hospital ship you intercepted during the Luminous Tide offensive." The world tilted. Ethan gripped the edge of the table. "That ship," he whispered. "We were told it was carrying weapons. Command said it was a trick. It was carrying 300 wounded. You fired warning shots across the bow, forced them to divert into the blockade zone." Marcus paused. 37 died when the ship's life support failed during the forced landing. She survived, but barely. Ethan's coffee turned to acid in his stomach. "Does she know?" "That you were the pilot?" Marcus shook his head. "No way to tell. But Ethan, if she's been coming to see you for 6 months and never said anything?" The implication hung between them. That afternoon, Carell arrived early. 11:15 instead of noon. Her hands shook as she tried to open the door. Ethan was there in 3 strides, pulling it open, steadying her with a hand on her elbow. "Hey," he said softly. "You're early." "I could not wait," she admitted. Her voice cracked. "Is that strange?" "No." He guided her to her table, brought her the sandwich and coffee without asking. "Carell, what's wrong?" She stared at the food. Then, slowly, she pushed the plate away. "I need to tell you something," she began. But before she could continue, a siren cut through the afternoon air. Long, mournful, official. They both froze. Through the window, Ethan saw drones descending over the docks, each one broadcasting the same message in multiple languages. "Attention all Orion nationals, Repatriation Protocol Sigma is now in effect. You have 72 hours to report to designated processing centers. Failure to comply will result in immediate detention." Carell's face went pale, the blue of her skin fading to something almost gray. "They are early," she whispered. "They said we had until next month." Ethan reached across the table, covered her trembling hand with his. "We'll figure this out." She looked at him, and in her silver eyes he saw something that broke him. Resignation. She'd known this was coming. She'd been counting down all along. "Ethan," she said quietly, "there is no figuring this out." They sat in silence as the drones finished their announcement and drifted away like mechanical birds of prey. The coffee grew cold. The sandwich remained untouched. "Tell me about the camps," Ethan finally said. Carl's laugh was bitter. "They call them rehabilitation centers, as if we are broken things to be fixed." She traced a finger along the rim of her cup. "My people who went to the first wave 3 months ago, we have heard nothing from them. No messages, no confirmations of arrival, just silence." "They wouldn't," Ethan started, but the words died. He knew better. The war had taught him exactly what people would do when they were afraid enough. "I came to say goodbye," Kirill admitted. "Today. That is why I arrived early. I thought I had more time to find the right words, but humans have a saying, yes? About best-laid plans?" Ethan's mind raced. 72 hours. There had to be something, someone, some loophole in the bureaucracy that could save her. "We can fight this. There are refugee advocacy groups, lawyers who specialize in—" "Ethan." She placed her hand over his. Her skin was cool, smooth, like touching calm water. "Do you know why I kept coming here?" "The coffee's terrible, and the food's worse." A real smile broke through her fear, just for a moment. The company makes up for it. He wanted to hold on to that smile, bottle it somehow, keep it safe from what was coming. Instead, he stood abruptly and moved to the back of the workshop. There, in a box he'd avoided opening for 3 years, were Sarah's things. His wife's things. Letters, photos, her journal. He'd read it once the night after her funeral, and then locked it away because the words hurt too much. But now, driven by something he couldn't name, he opened it again. The entry was near the end, dated 2 weeks before she died. "I saw Ethan save an Orion child today. She'd gotten separated from her guardian during the market panic, and everyone else just walked past her, this tiny blue girl crying on the corner." But Ethan stopped. He picked her up, bought her a candy stick, and carried her through 3 sectors until we found her family. He doesn't think I noticed how his hands shook the whole time, how he had to stop twice to breathe through the memories. He's so scared of what the war made him. But I wish he could see what I see, a man trying so hard to be kind that it physically hurts him. One day he'll need to remember that, to help someone who, by all rights, he should hate. And in that moment, he'll discover what love actually means. Ethan's vision blurred. He closed the journal carefully as if it might break. When he returned to the table, Carol was watching him with an expression he couldn't read. "I need to teach you something," he said, sitting down across from her. "Teach me what?" "How humans say goodbye." He took a breath. "We're terrible at it, actually. We hug for too long, or not long enough. We make promises we can't keep. We say see you soon when we mean see you never. We lie to each other's faces because honesty is too sharp. This does not sound like a good system." "It's not." He reached across the table, took both her hands in his. "But here's what we do get right. We show up, even when it hurts, especially when it hurts." "Oh, you are showing up now," she observed quietly. "And you showed up for 6 months, paying me in treasures when I would have given you that terrible coffee for free." Carell's eyes glistened with something that might have been tears if Orions cried the way humans did. Instead, her bioluminescent markings flickered, a language of light that meant sorrow. "There is something I must ask you, Dud," she said. "Something I have wanted to ask for months, but I was afraid of your answer. Ask me. Would you lose everything for someone your people hate?" The question landed like a physical blow. Ethan thought about the war, the propaganda, the faces of friends who didn't come home. He thought about Sarah and her journal and that crying Orion child he'd helped because he couldn't not help her. He thought about Friday lunches and small treasures and a blue woman who taught him that companionship didn't need language or history or even trust at first, just consistency, just showing up. "Yeah," he said finally. "I think I would." Carell's grip on his hands tightened. "Do not say such things lightly, Ethan Cole. The universe has a way of testing such promises. Outside, the rain started again, but different now, urgent, counting down. Carell stood, and for a moment he thought she would leave. Instead, she moved around the table and did something she'd never done before. She hugged him. Her arms were thin but strong, her cheek cold against his shoulder. She smelled like rain and something else, something that reminded him of the garden Sarah used to keep. "Thank you for 6 months of Fridays," she whispered. "Thank you for teaching me that not all humans are soldiers." When she pulled away, her hand went to her sleeve, adjusting something there, a nervous gesture he'd seen before but never questioned. "I will see you tomorrow," she asked at the door. "Tomorrow," he confirmed, "and the day after that, and the day after that." She smiled, but it was the saddest thing he'd ever seen. The door closed, the bell chimed, and Ethan realized with absolute certainty that he was already in too deep to let her go without a fight. The address Marcus had given him led to a building that officially didn't exist, 3 levels below the old Pike Place market, in tunnels that predated the war by centuries. The Friends of the Exiled operated in a space that smelled of damp concrete and desperate hope. Ethan descended the stairs, each step taking him deeper into a world he'd only heard whispers about. At the bottom, a woman with gray hair and sharp eyes looked him up and down. "You're Cole," she said, not a question. "Marcus sent me." "Marcus sends a lot of people these days. Most of them are too late." She gestured for him to follow. "I'm Elena. We have 47 hours before the first transports leave. What's your situation?" "Orion woman, medical officer, exiled after the war. She's been here for 3 years. She have anyone? Family? Connections? Leverage?" "Just me." Elena stopped walking and turned to face him fully. "Just you. An ex-military pilot who shot down Orion ships, trying to save an Orion refugee. You understand how that looks?" "I understand how it is." Something in his voice must have convinced her because she nodded and continued walking. They entered a large room filled with makeshift sleeping areas, medical supplies, and people. So many people. Orions mostly, but others too. Refugees from a dozen worlds that humanity had touched during its brief, violent expansion into the stars. "We've been running this operation for 2 years, Elena explained. "Started after the first purge when we realized the government's definition of rehabilitation was a lot closer to elimination. We've moved about 200 people through here. Got them new identities, passage to neutral stations, sometimes even back to their homeworlds through unofficial channels." "Can you help her?" "Depends. She willing to leave Earth?" Ethan hadn't even considered that. The idea of Carell not being here, not walking into his shop every Friday, created a hollow feeling in his chest. If it keeps her alive, yes. Good answer. Elena pulled up a holo display. "We have a ship leaving Monday night, heading to the Kepler station, neutral territory. We can get her on board, but she'll need to stay here until then. Can't risk her being picked up during sweep. I'll bring her tonight." "Cole." Elena's voice softened. "You need to understand what you're risking. If they trace her to you, you're looking at harboring charges. That's 10 years minimum. And given your service record, they'll make an example of you." He thought about Sarah's journal, about promises made to the dead and debts owed to the living. "I understand." That night, Ethan found himself in the Orion Quarter, a neighborhood that had shrunk by half since the protocols began. Kara lived in a converted storage unit near the port, the kind of place that charged by the week because no one expected refugees to stay longer. He knocked, waited, knocked again. When she opened the door, he saw what her careful composure had been hiding. She'd been crying, if that's what Orions did. Her markings were dim, her eyes red-rimmed and exhausted. "Ethan? What are you doing here?" "Taking you somewhere safe." He held out his hand. "Pack light. We need to move now." She stared at him, and for a long moment, he thought she might refuse. Then she stepped aside, and he saw the room. Bare walls, a sleeping mat, a single bag already packed. She'd been ready to run. "There is something you should know first," she said quietly, not moving to take his hand. "About the Velkarath, the hospital ship." His blood went cold. "Karel, I know it was you." Her voice was steady, but her markings flickered rapidly. "I pulled the combat records 3 months ago. The pilot designation matched the registration of your old workshop permits. You were the interceptor." The world narrowed to just the two of them and the truth sitting between them like a living thing. "Why didn't you say anything?" he managed. "Because I was angry. Because I came here planning to hate you." She finally met his eyes. "Because I wanted to understand how the man who forced our ship down could also be the man who makes terrible coffee with such care. I came to find a monster, Ethan. I found someone trying very hard not to be one." "The 37 who died," he started, but she raised a hand. "Were people I knew, people I treated, people I failed to save when your warning shots damaged our stabilizers." She took a shaky breath. "But I also know you were following orders. I also know that war makes killers of healers, and healers of killers. I also know that you have spent every Friday for 6 months trying to give me something you did not know you took. Karel, I'm so sorry." "I know. I have known since the 2nd week, when you asked me about my scars and your hand shook so badly you spilled the coffee. You carry your ghosts differently than we do, but they haunt you just the same." She moved to the window, looked out at the dark streets. "That is why I cannot let you risk yourself for me. You have already paid enough. That's not your choice to make. It should be." Ethan crossed the room, stood beside her. Through the window, they could see the transport ships gathering in the distance, waiting for their cargo of exiled souls. "My wife wrote something before she died," he said quietly. "She said that one day I would need to help someone I had every right to hate. That in doing so, I'd understand what love actually means." He turned to face her. "She was wrong about one thing, though. I never hated you. Not even before I knew you." "Why not?" "Because hate is easy, and I've had enough easy answers to last a lifetime." Karel's markings brightened, just slightly, a small galaxy of light across her blue skin. "If we do this, if I run, they will come for you. Let them." She studied his face for a long moment. Then, finally, she picked up her bag. "Show me this place of yours," she said. "This embassy of the forgotten." They left through the back alleys, 2 ghosts moving through a city that had stopped seeing them. And for the first time in 72 hours, Ethan allowed himself to hope that maybe, just maybe, they could outrun what was coming. He should have known better. Hope in wartime was always a gambler's bet, and the house always won eventually. Elena's network moved like water through the cracks of bureaucracy. Within 12 hours, Karel had new documentation, a berth on the Monday transport, and a cover story that would hold up to anything short of DNA verification. Ethan watched from the corner of the underground facility as Elena's team worked with practiced efficiency. They'd done this before, many times. Each refugee was a small victory against a system that preferred the simplicity of exile to the complexity of reconciliation. "She'll need to stay here until departure," Elena told him. "Can't risk her being seen above ground. Sweeps start tomorrow and they're using facial recognition drones this time." "I understand." But Ethan's gaze kept drifting to Karel, who sat with a group of other Orions, speaking in their melodic language. For the first time since he'd known her, she looked like she belonged somewhere. Marcus appeared at his elbow, holding 2 cups of the kind of coffee that came from ration packs and tasted like regret. "The network's been compromised," he said without preamble. Ethan's blood turned to ice. "What?" "Someone talked. Don't know who yet, but Command's been asking questions about the old market tunnels. They haven't found this location specifically, but they're closing in." Marcus took a long drink of his terrible coffee. "They've also locked down the underwater routes. The shipping channels you were planning to use, they're running sonar sweeps every 2 hours now. The transport on Monday is a trap, has to be. They're letting Elena think she's still operational while they track every person she moves. Marcus looked exhausted. "I've been trying to warn people, but communications locked down. You and Carell got lucky. You came in just before the net tightened." Ethan's mind raced. 72 hours minus 12 meant 60 hours left. 60 hours to find a new plan, a new route, a new impossible solution. There has to be another way. There isn't. Not without serious resources, and those take time we don't have. Marcus gripped his shoulder. "Ethan, maybe it's time to accept that some fights can't be won. She goes on that transport. At least she's documented. They can't just disappear her without raising questions. The camps will kill her anyway, just slower. Maybe, or maybe she survives long enough for the political situation to change. It's not perfect, but it's something." Ethan looked across the room at Carell. She was showing something to a young Orion boy, both of them laughing at whatever it was. The sound cut through the despair of the underground space like light through water. "I can't let her go," he admitted quietly. "I know." Marcus sighed. "That's why I brought these." He slid a data chip across the table. Ethan picked it up, examining the unmarked surface. "What is it?" "Falsified patrol schedules, security gaps, maintenance windows. Everything you'd need to know if you were crazy enough to try breaking someone out of a government transport." Marcus met his eyes. "I'm not saying you should do this. I'm saying that if someone were to do this, this information would be useful, hypothetically. Marcus, if they trace this to you, then they trace it to me. I'm tired, Ethan, tired of following orders that make me sick, tired of watching good people get processed like cargo." He stood. "Sarah was my friend too. She'd have already broken every rule by now." He left before Ethan could respond. The data chip felt heavy in Ethan's palm, weighted with possibility and consequence. He was about to pocket it when a hand touched his arm. Carell stood beside him, her expression unreadable. "I heard," she said simply. "How much?" "Enough to know that you are considering something extraordinarily stupid." She sat down across from him. "Enough to know that I should tell you to stop, but I understand you well enough now to know you will not. The transport is compromised. If you get on that ship, I will be exactly where I was always going to end up." She placed her hands flat on the table. "But if you try to save me and fail, you will end up there beside me, or worse." "There's worse than death?" "Yes, living with the knowledge that you could have chosen differently." Ethan turned the data chip over in his fingers. Around them, the underground facility hummed with quiet desperation. People trying to sleep, trying to hope, trying to believe that tomorrow would somehow be better than today. "I made you a promise," he said. 6 months of Fridays, that I'd always show up. Friday is 2 days away. Then I have 2 days to keep my promise." Carell reached across the table and gently took the data chip from his hand. For a moment, he thought she would throw it away, end this impossible plan before it began. Instead, she slipped it into her sleeve, next to something else he couldn't quite see. "If we do this," she said quietly, "we do it together. No more you saving me. We save each other, or we fail together. That's not negotiable." Her silver eyes held his. "Ethan, you asked me once why I kept coming to your workshop. The truth is, I was lonely. So lonely I thought I might disappear from sheer irrelevance. But you saw me. Every Friday you saw me. Not as an Orion, not as an enemy, not as a problem to be solved, just as someone who liked bad coffee and worse sandwiches. They're not that bad." A smile ghosted across her face. "They are terrible, but they were mine. You gave me something to belong to, even if it was just a Friday ritual." Carell: "So, yes, I will let you try this impossible thing, but only if you promise me something in return. Anything. If it fails, if they catch us, you do not blame yourself. You do not carry me as another ghost." Her markings flickered, bright and fierce. "Promise me that you will remember Friday lunches instead of whatever comes after." Ethan wanted to argue, To tell her that of course they would succeed, that his planning and Marcus's intel and sheer stubborn hope would be enough. But they'd both been through a war. They knew how often the universe laughed at careful plans. "I promise," he said. She nodded, satisfied. Then she stood and returned to the other Orions, leaving Ethan alone with his terrible coffee and his even more terrible plan. Elena found him an hour later, staring at the data chip he'd somehow gotten back. "Whatever you're thinking," she said, "don't. Too late. They'll kill you." "Probably." She sat down heavily. "You military boys are all the same. Think you can fix the world one impossible mission at a time. Did it work before? Sometimes. But the cost was always higher than expected." She leaned back. "I can give you 48 hours. After that, this place gets evacuated whether you're back or not. Deal?" "Deal." "Good." She stood to leave, then paused. "Cole? She's lucky to have someone willing to be this stupid for her." "I'm the lucky one," he replied. And he meant it. Even knowing what was coming, even understanding that hope was a luxury neither of them could afford, he meant it. Because Carell had given him something he thought he'd lost in the war. A reason to fight that had nothing to do with orders or duty or revenge. She'd given him a Friday ritual worth protecting. Now he just had to figure out how to protect it against an entire government's machinery of exile. The memory came to Ethan at 3 a.m, dragged up from the depths where he'd buried it along with all the other things the war had made him do. The Vel'Karath had appeared on his targeting screen like a ghost ship, running silent through the blockade zone. Command's orders had been clear: intercept, identify, disable if necessary. Intelligence suggested weapons smuggling, a desperate Orion attempt to break through the siege. He'd fired warning shots, precisely calculated to avoid hull breaches, but something had gone wrong. Maybe his calculations were off. Maybe the ship's shielding was damaged from a previous encounter. Maybe the universe just decided that day was a good day for tragedy. The Vel'Karath had listed, its engines sputtering, before crash landing on a moon that humanity had claimed but never bothered to properly terraform. Ethan had watched it fall, something sick and cold settling in his stomach. Later, they'd learned the truth. Hospital ship, 300 wounded aboard, 37 dead from life support failure during the forced landing. He'd requested a discharge the next day. They'd given him a medal instead. Now, sitting in the underground facility with Carell sleeping 20 feet away, Ethan finally allowed himself to really look at that memory. To see it not through the lens of duty or orders, but through the eyes of the woman who'd survived his mistake, and somehow decided he was worth saving anyway. "You are awake." He turned. Carell stood in the shadows, wrapped in a blanket that made her look smaller, more fragile than she actually was. "Can't sleep," he admitted. "Nor can I." She moved to sit beside him close enough that he could feel the coolness radiating from her skin. "I keep thinking about the Vel'Karath. Do you want to know what I remember?" "I'm not sure I do." "I will tell you anyway, because you need to hear it." She pulled the blanket tighter. "I remember the warning shots. I remember Dr. Vosch, our chief medical officer, saying that they were precision strikes, that whoever fired them was trying not to kill us. I failed anyway." "Yes, but you tried. And in war, Ethan, trying to minimize death is its own kind of courage." She turned to face him. "The 37 who died, I knew each of their names. Kashira, who sang songs from her homeworld to calm the wounded. Tevol, who was learning human languages because he believed in a future where we talked instead of fought. Mira, who was only 16 and had survived 3 battles but could not survive the landing. Each name was a knife. Ethan felt them all. I carried their bodies to the memorial grove we built on that moon," Carell continued, her voice steady but her markings flickering with grief. "I spoke their names to the stars, and I swore I would survive long enough to understand why. Why the war? Why the death? Why some of us were allowed to continue breathing when others were not." "Did you find your answer?" "Yes, on a Friday afternoon, in a workshop that smelled like oil and bad coffee? She met his eyes. The answer was not grand or philosophical. It was simply this: I survived so that I could learn that the person who nearly killed me could also be the person who saved me. Not from death, but from the belief that all humans were the same. I don't deserve that. No one deserves anything. We simply receive what we are given and decide what to do with it. She touched his hand, her fingers cool against his skin. I came to your workshop planning to hate you. I stayed because hating you required more energy than I had. And somewhere between week 3 and week 4, I realized that hate was boring. It was the same story told over and over. But you, Ethan Cole, you were different every time. Surprising. Surprising how? You made terrible jokes about moving cheese. You hummed when you worked. You always cleaned the table before I arrived, even though you pretended not to care. You were terrible at pretending. Her smile was soft. And then I found your wife's memorial page, and I understood. You were not trying to save me. You were trying to save yourself from becoming the thing the war wanted you to be. Ethan's throat tightened. Sarah always said I was too stubborn to give up on being decent. She was right. Carell squeezed his hand. That is why I need to tell you something. Something I should have told you weeks ago. What? She stood, moved to her bag, and pulled out a small bundle wrapped in cloth. When she unfolded it, Ethan saw what looked like a datapad, old and damaged. This belonged to Dr. Vosh. I found it in the wreckage after we were rescued. He had been documenting everything during the war, trying to create a record of what really happened, the truth beneath the propaganda. She activated the screen. A man's face appeared, Ariane, older, with kind eyes. If you are watching this, the recording said, then I am dead. But perhaps that means the war is over and someone survived to hear the truth. Carell fast-forwarded through hours of footage until she found what she was looking for. The timestamp showed it was recorded 3 days before the Velkorath went down. I met an interesting human today. Dr. Vosh's voice continued. Or rather, I treated one. She was a combat medic, wounded during an engagement with our forces. She asked me why we kept fighting, why we did not just surrender and end the suffering. I told her that we asked the same question about humanity, and then she said something I will never forget. Some of us do not want this war. Some of us are fighting to end it the only way we know how, by refusing to stop seeing our enemies as people. The recording showed a woman's face, human, exhausted, with Sarah's eyes. Ethan's world stopped. Her name was Sarah Cole, Dr. Vosh said, and she told me that, if I survived, I should find her husband and tell him that he was fighting the same war she was, the war to stay human when everything tried to make you monstrous. The recording ended. Ethan sat in silence, the weight of 3 years of grief reshaping itself into something else. Not lighter, but different. Sarah hadn't just believed in doing good. She'd died doing it, treating Orion wounded in a field hospital that got caught in crossfire. I wanted to show you this months ago, Carol said quietly. But I was afraid. Afraid you would think I was manipulating you with your own grief. Afraid you would hate me for keeping this secret. Afraid that knowing your wife died saving my people would make you resent me for surviving when she did not. Is that why you kept coming back? Because you felt guilty? No. Her voice was firm. I kept coming back because your terrible coffee reminded me that life continues, even after we think it has ended. I kept coming back because Friday lunches were the first thing I looked forward to since the war ended. I kept coming back because you saw me, Ethan, not as a debt to your wife, but as myself. Ethan stood, crossed to her, and pulled her into a hug. She stiffened in surprise, then slowly relaxed against him. Thank you, he whispered. For what? For giving Sarah's sacrifice meaning, for surviving, for teaching me that the war doesn't get to define who we become after it ends." They stood like that for a long moment. Two people shaped by the same tragedy, learning that shared grief could become something else if you were brave enough to let it. When they finally pulled apart, Carell's markings were bright, a constellation of light in the darkness of the underground facility. "We should sleep," she said. "Tomorrow we begin planning your impossible rescue." "Our impossible rescue," he corrected. "Yes," she smiled. "Our impossible rescue." But neither of them moved to sleep. Instead, they sat together in the quiet, watching the others rest, knowing that in 36 hours, everything would change. The war had taken so much from both of them, but it had also inadvertently given them this: a Friday ritual, a shared understanding, and the knowledge that sometimes the people you were supposed to hate end up teaching you how to be human again. Outside, the rain continued its eternal Seattle rhythm. Inside, two ghosts made plans to outrun the future. And somewhere, in whatever place existed beyond, Ethan liked to think Sarah was smiling at the beautiful mess he'd gotten himself into. She'd always loved impossible causes. They came for Marcus at dawn. Ethan was checking the patrol schedules when Elena burst into the planning room, her face pale. "They got him? Port Authority arrested him an hour ago. Harboring charges, conspiracy, everything." The data chip felt like lead in Ethan's pocket. The schedules, the security gaps, the carefully planned route, all of it traced back to Marcus. And Marcus would never talk, which meant they'd make an example of him. "We have to accelerate the timeline," Elena said. "If Marcus breaks—" "He won't. Everyone breaks eventually, Cole, you know that." Ethan did know that. The war had taught him exactly how fragile human resolve could be when subjected to the right pressure. Carell appeared beside him, her hand finding his. "What do we do?" "We stick to the plan." Marcus knew the risks. But the words felt hollow. Another person paying for his choices, another debt added to the ledger he'd never be able to balance. The next 6 hours were a masterclass in controlled chaos. Elena's network moved people, supplies, and information with desperate efficiency. The underground facility began its evacuation protocol, refugees scattering to safe houses throughout the city like seeds in a storm. Carell stayed close to Ethan, her presence a steady anchor in the swirling uncertainty. They didn't speak much. There wasn't much to say. The plan was simple, probably fatally so. Wait for the shift change at the processing center. Use Marcus's codes to access the transport staging area, and disappear into the maintenance tunnels before anyone noticed. Simple. Impossible. Their only chance. At 1400 hours, Ethan's comm unit buzzed. "Unknown number." "Cole," a voice said. Formal, military, the kind of voice that had learned to convey authority without raising volume. "This is Commander Voss, Earth Authority Internal Security. I believe we should talk." Ethan's blood went cold. He activated the privacy screen, aware of Carell watching him with those two perceptive silver eyes. "I don't have anything to say to you." "That's unfortunate because I have quite a bit to say to you. Specifically about your friend Marcus Reeves and the rather extensive network of illegal activity he's been running. Activity that, I should mention, includes communications with your workshop over the past 72 hours. "I don't know what you're talking about." "Of course you don't." Voss's tone was almost amused. "Here's what I know, Cole. You're harboring an Orion national. You've been in contact with known smuggling operations, and you're planning something spectacularly stupid for 1800 hours today." Ethan said nothing. There was nothing to say. "Here's what I'm offering," Voss continued. "The Orion, Carell of the Velkarath Medical Corps, surrenders herself to custody. She goes on the scheduled transport with full documentation, no questions asked. And you go free. We forget about the harboring charges. We forget about your association with Reeves. We forget that you were ever involved. And Marcus? Reeves is facing 10 years minimum. That's not negotiable. But you and your blue friend? That's still on the table. You have 1 hour to decide." The call ended. Ethan stood there, staring at the blank screen, feeling the walls of the underground facility closing in. An hour? 60 minutes to choose between saving Karel and saving himself, when the truth was that neither option actually saved anything. "You should take it," Karel said quietly. He turned. She was standing with her bag already packed, her expression composed in that way that meant she was breaking inside. "No. Ethan, this is the only way you survive this." "I don't care about surviving this." "Well, I do." Her voice cracked just slightly. "I care very much about you surviving this because I cannot carry another death that I could have prevented." "This isn't the Velkareth." "It is exactly the Velkareth." She moved closer, her hands gripping his arms. "It is me watching someone make a choice that will destroy them, all because they think I am worth saving. But I am not, Ethan. I am just one person, one Orion who has already lived longer than she had any right to." "Don't say that." "It is true. I should have died on that moon with the others. Every day since has been borrowed time." Her markings flickered, erratic with emotion. "So please, let me give it back. Let me choose this so that you do not have to carry me the way you carried the Velkareth, the way you carried Sarah." Ethan cupped her face in his hands, felt the cool smoothness of her skin, saw the fear and determination warring in her eyes. "You want to know what Sarah wrote in her journal?" he asked. "She wrote that love is choosing to lose, knowing it is worth it. She wrote that the only way to survive war is to refuse to let it make you stop caring, even when caring costs everything. That is beautiful. That is also a path to destruction." "Maybe, but it's my path, and I'm choosing it with full knowledge of where it leads." He pressed his forehead against hers, a gesture that felt both foreign and perfectly natural. "You asked me once if I would lose everything for someone my people hate. The answer is yes. It always was yes, from the moment you walked into my workshop asking about moving cheese." Karel laughed, a broken sound that was half sob. "You are so stubborn. So are you. I am trying to save you. And I am trying to save us." He pulled back, met her eyes. "Not from the camps or the government or whatever comes next, from the war, from the belief that we are defined by the worst things we have done or had done to us. Ethan, I know the plan is probably going to fail. I know they're watching us. I know that an hour from now, we might both be in custody." He smiled, and it felt real despite everything. "But at least we'll have tried. At least we'll have chosen each other over easy survival." Karel stared at him for a long moment. Then, slowly, she reached into her sleeve and pulled out a folded piece of paper, the letter she'd been carrying all along. "I wrote this 3 weeks ago," she admitted. "The day I found out about the repatriation protocols. It was supposed to be my goodbye, my explanation for why I had to leave before you could try to save me." "What changed?" "You did. You kept showing up. You kept seeing me. You kept making terrible coffee and worse jokes. And you kept being the kind of human that makes me believe we did not fight the war for nothing." She placed the letter in his hand. "So I will stay. Not because you convinced me, but because I choose to. I choose Friday lunches over safety. I choose us over survival." Ethan looked at the letter, sealed with something that looked like Orion wax. He didn't open it. "Save it for later," he said. "Later when? When we need to remember why impossible plans are worth attempting." They spent the remaining 47 minutes preparing. Not for escape, not anymore. For something else. Something neither of them could quite name, but both of them understood. At 17:55, Ethan's comm buzzed again. "Have you decided?" Voss asked. "Yeah," Ethan replied. "We're not running. We're not surrendering. We're going to Friday lunch." There was a long pause. "You're insane," Voss said finally. "Probably, but I'm consistently insane, and there's something to be said for that." "Cole, I can't protect you if you do this. Never asked you to. Another pause. You're a fool. So I've been told. For what it's worth, I hope whatever point you're trying to make is worth it. The call ended. Kirill stood beside him, her hand in his, her face tilted toward the ceiling, as if she could see through the concrete to the sky above. Do you think it is still raining? She asked. In Seattle? Always. Good. I would hate to miss the rain. They climbed the stairs together, leaving the underground facility behind. Behind them, Elena watched them go, her expression unreadable. At the top, they pushed open the door. The sky was clear, blue, endless. For the first time in recorded Seattle history, the rain had stopped. Kirill laughed, and the sound carried across the empty street like music. Of course, she said. Of course, the universe would choose today. Ethan squeezed her hand. Whatever came next, they would face it together. Not as ex-pilot and exiled refugee, not as victor and victim, just as two people who had decided that Friday lunches were worth fighting for, even when the fight was already lost. And somewhere in the distance, sirens began to wail. The call came from an unexpected source. Commander Voss himself. Cole, I've done something either very wise or very stupid. I'm granting you 6 hours. Call it humanitarian consideration. Call it bureaucratic oversight. Call it whatever you want. But Karela Velkarath has permission for a final meal before transport processing. Ethan gripped the comm unit. Why? Because Marcus Reeves spent 2 hours telling me about your wife, about what she did during the war, about how some of us are supposed to be better than the machine we serve. A pause. 6 hours, Cole. Make them count. The line went dead. Ethan looked at Karel, who had heard everything through the comm speaker. A last meal, she said softly. How very human. It's not enough time. It is exactly enough time. Come, let us make Friday lunch one final time. They returned to the workshop as the sun began its descent toward the horizon. The clear sky had brought people out of their homes, everyone marveling at the absence of rain like it was a miracle. Maybe it was. Ethan unlocked the door, and the familiar smell of oil and old coffee greeted them like a friend. Everything was exactly as he'd left it 72 hours ago, frozen in time. Karel moved to her usual table while Ethan started the espresso machine, but before he could begin preparing her sandwich, there was a knock at the door. Elena stood outside, and behind her, a small crowd of people. Humans mostly, but others too. People from the underground network. Refugees who'd been helped, even a few Orions who'd heard somehow. We thought, Elena said, that if this was going to be a last meal, it should be done properly. They flooded in, each person carrying something. Food, mostly. Dishes from a dozen worlds, prepared with whatever ingredients could be found in a post-war city. There was hardly room to move in the small workshop, but somehow they made it work. Mrs. I. Chen from the noodle shop brought steaming bowls of pho. The Reeves family, Marcus's parents, brought what looked like the last of their hoarded chocolate. Others brought bread, fruit, things that had been saved for special occasions. And they brought stories. An Orion woman named Tesha told how Carol had helped her daughter through a medical emergency when no human doctor would see them. A human man named Robert spoke about how Carol had taught him Orion meditation techniques after his own war trauma became unbearable. One by one, people shared how this quiet blue woman had touched their lives in small but significant ways. Carol listened with tears streaming down her face, her markings blazing like stars. I did not know, she whispered to Ethan. I did not know I mattered to so many. You matter, he replied simply. You've always mattered. As the sun touched the horizon, painting the clear sky in colors Seattle rarely saw, Carol stood and raised her cup of terrible coffee. I need to teach you something, she announced to the crowd. A word from my language that has no human translation. She placed her free hand over her heart. Kal Shiva, It means the person who keeps your warmth. Not your heat, your warmth. The difference between surviving and living. The person who reminds you that you are more than your worst day. She turned to Ethan. You are my Kal Shiva, Ethan Cole. You in this terrible workshop and these Friday lunches that I will carry with me wherever I go next. You taught me that humanity is not a species. It is a choice. The choice to see each other, to show up, to care even when caring is inconvenient or dangerous or illogical. Karel, Ethan started, but she shook her head. Let me finish. When they take me tonight, when I board that transport, I want everyone here to remember something. I am not a victim. I am not a tragedy. I am someone who was loved, who loved in return, and who chose connection over safety until the very end. And that is more than most beings get in a lifetime. The workshop was silent, except for the sound of tears falling and people trying not to make noise while their hearts broke. Ethan stood and moved to stand beside her. He raised his own cup, coffee that had gone cold but somehow tasted perfect. To Carol, he said, who taught a bitter ex-pilot that some wars are worth fighting, even when you know you're going to lose, who turned Friday lunches into an act of revolution, who proved that the universe hasn't broken us yet. To Karel, the crowd echoed. They drank together as the sun set, and for a few hours the workshop became something more than a place of repairs. It became a testament, a small rebellion against the machinery of exile and fear. At 1100 hours, a transport arrived outside. Not the military kind, but a civilian vehicle. Commander Voss himself stepped out, his expression unreadable. He entered the workshop and looked around at the gathered crowd, at the makeshift feast, at Karel and Ethan standing together. It's time, he said quietly. Karel nodded. She embraced Elena, then each of the others who had brought food and stories and love. When she came to Ethan, she held him for a long moment. "Do not watch me go," she whispered. I could not bear it. "I promised I'd always show up," he replied. "I'm keeping that promise." She pulled back and he saw something flicker across her face. Resignation. Acceptance. Love. Her hand went to her sleeve, adjusting something there one final time. "Then come with me to the docks," she said. "But only to the docks. After that, you go back to this workshop and you keep fixing things. You keep making terrible coffee. You keep showing up for the next person who needs a Friday ritual. Karel. Promise me, Ethan. Promise me that this does not end with my leaving. Promise me that you will choose to keep being human, even after I am gone." He wanted to refuse, to tell her that he would fight, that he would follow her to those camps and burn them down if he had to. But that wasn't what she needed. What she needed was for him to survive this, to carry forward what they'd built together. "I promise," he said, and felt something in him break and rebuild itself simultaneously. They walked to the transport together, the crowd following like mourners in a funeral procession. At the docks, under a sky that had remembered how to be clear, Karel turned to face them all one last time. "Thank you," she said, her voice carrying across the water. "Thank you for teaching me that home is not a place. It is people who remember your name." Then she entered the transport, and the door closed behind her. Ethan stood there, his hands in his pockets, feeling the weight of her letter against his chest. Around him, people began to disperse, returning to their lives, carrying the memory of a blue woman who had chosen love over survival. Commander Voss approached him as the transport began to power up. "For what it's worth," Voss said, "I hope she makes it." "Me too." "Cole, I need you to know something. The camps, they're not what people think. Some of them are rehabilitating Oriens for re-entry. It's slow, it's bureaucratic, but some of them do come back." It was meant to be comforting, it wasn't. But Ethan appreciated the attempt. "Thank you for the 6 hours," he said. Thank you for reminding me why I took this job in the first place." Voss handed him a card. "If you need anything, if you hear from her, call me. Off the record." The transport lifted off, its engines humming against the clear sky. Ethan watched until it was nothing more than a light among the stars. Then finally he turned and walked back to his workshop. Inside, the remnants of the feast remained. He should clean it up, should restore order to the chaos. Instead, he sat at Karel's table and opened the letter she'd been carrying in her sleeve for 3 weeks. The letter was written in careful English, Karel's handwriting showing the precision of someone who'd learned the language late, but loved it enough to get it right. "Ethan, if you are reading this, I have left, not because I wanted to, but because staying would have destroyed you, and I could not bear that. I came to your workshop 6 months ago with a simple plan. Understand the pilot who shot down the Velkarath, find closure, move on with whatever time I had left. I was so certain I would hate you, so prepared for you to be the monster that war propaganda had promised. Instead, I found a man who made bad jokes about cheese, a man who hummed when he thought no one was listening, a man who cleaned tables for a customer who paid in trinkets and gratitude. You showed me that humans are not a monolith of violence. You are also this: stubbornness that looks like hope, chaos that creates connection, illogical kindness that saves lives. I learned something in our Fridays together. I learned that love is not always romantic. Sometimes it is just showing up. Sometimes it is terrible coffee shared in comfortable silence. Sometimes it is choosing to see someone when the world has decided they are invisible. You saw me, Ethan. Every Friday. You saw me. And so I need to tell you something, because I will not have the courage to say it to your face. The transmitter I am leaving with this letter is not broken. It is keyed to every major news network on Earth, every refugee channel, every underground communication system that Elena's network has access to. When I board that transport, when they process me and send me to whatever camp awaits, I will activate it, and the galaxy will hear what I have to say. Not about politics or war or whose fault anything is. About a workshop in Seattle where a man named Ethan Cole taught an exiled Aryan that humanity was worth believing in again. They will call it propaganda. They will say I am manipulating sentiment. Let them. I will speak my truth, that I came to hate you and learn to love you instead, and in doing so, learn that love is the most revolutionary act available to us. But Ethan, here is what I need you to do. When I am gone, when the message broadcasts, when the inevitable chaos follows, do not come after me. Do not try to save me from what I have chosen. Instead, save the next person. Open the workshop to refugees who need a place to belong. Make them terrible coffee and teach them that showing up is a form of resistance. Build what we started, but bigger, louder, impossible to ignore. Turn Friday lunches into a movement. If the universe has any justice, we will meet again. If it does not, then at least we had this. 26 Fridays where 2 people from opposite sides of a war chose to be kind to each other. That is not nothing. That is everything. With more love than I knew how to feel, Karel below the signature was a code. Ethan stared at it, his hands shaking. She'd planned this, all of it. The transmitter she'd been adjusting in her sleeve, the careful goodbyes, the promise to let him watch her go. She'd turned her deportation into a statement, her exile into an act of defiance. Ethan activated the code. For a moment, nothing happened. Then his comm unit lit up with incoming connections. Hundreds of them. Thousands. The message was broadcasting across every channel simultaneously, impossible to block or suppress. Carol's face appeared on the screen recorded earlier that day. She stood in the workshop, right by her usual table. "My name is Karel of Velkarath," she began. "I am Aryan. I am a former medical officer. I am a refugee. And I am in love with my enemy." Ethan's breath caught. "I want to tell you about a man named Ethan Cole," she continued. "He is the pilot who shot down my ship during the war. He is responsible for deaths that I still mourn. And he is also the person who taught me what humanity actually means." The message continued, Carell speaking with calm determination about their Fridays together, about the workshop, about the choice to see each other as people rather than symbols. She spoke about Sarah, about how one woman's death had created a bridge between two people who should have been enemies. "I am being deported tonight," she said near the end. "Not because I am dangerous, but because I am inconvenient. Because I remind people that the war is over, but the peace is incomplete. Because my existence challenges the simple narrative that says we cannot learn to live together. But I want you to know something. I am not afraid. Because I have learned from humans that showing up, even when you will lose, is its own form of victory. I showed up for 26 Fridays, and those Fridays changed my life. So I ask you this, who are you showing up for? Who are you choosing to see when the world tells you to look away? Because that choice, that simple choice to care about someone you are supposed to hate, that is how wars actually end. Not with treaties or reparations or political maneuvering, with coffee, with sandwiches, with Friday rituals that prove we are all just beings trying to find warmth in a cold universe. The message ended with Carell placing a hand over her heart. "Kalsheva," she said softly. "Find yours. Keep their warmth. Show up." The screen went dark. Ethan sat in stunned silence. Around him, the workshop felt both emptier and more full than it ever had. His comm unit exploded with incoming messages, news agencies demanding interviews, refugee networks asking for his involvement, government officials threatening consequences for unauthorized broadcasts. He ignored all of it. Instead, he stood and walked to the window. Outside, the clear sky had given way to clouds, and the rain was beginning its familiar pattern once more, Seattle remembering itself. But something had changed. In the streets below, he could see people gathering. Small clusters at first, then larger groups. Humans and aliens standing together, some holding signs, others just standing in solidarity. Carell's message had spread like wildfire. Within an hour, protests had erupted at every major processing center on Earth. Within 2 hours, 3 different governments had issued statements about reviewing repatriation policies. Within 3 hours, Marcus was released from custody. The charges mysteriously dropped. And in the workshop, Ethan Cole stood at the window with tears streaming down his face, watching as one blue woman's Friday ritual became a revolution. His comm unit buzzed. "Commander Voss." "Cole, I don't know whether to arrest you or give you a medal." "Neither," Ethan replied. "Just let me make coffee." "The transport with Carol aboard has been recalled. All transports have. The protocols are under emergency review." Voss paused. "You should know this isn't over, but it's not over in a way that might actually mean something." "Is she coming back?" "Processing will take weeks, maybe months. But yeah, eventually they'll all come back." The call ended. Ethan looked around the workshop, at the table where Carell had sat every Friday, at the espresso machine that made terrible coffee, at the space that had somehow become more than a business, more than a refuge. It had become a promise, a statement, proof that showing up mattered. He made a pot of coffee, terrible as always, and left it by the window where people passing by could see the light on inside. Within 20 minutes, the first refugee arrived, a young Centaurian, scared and alone, looking for shelter. "Come in," Ethan said. "Coffee's fresh, or as fresh as it gets here. You like grilled cheese?" The Centaurian nodded, not quite understanding but sensing safety. As Ethan prepared the sandwich, more people began to arrive. Word had spread, the workshop where the Blue Woman's message originated, the place where Friday rituals were born. By midnight, the workshop was full. By dawn, Ethan had to start organizing shifts just to accommodate everyone who wanted to help or be helped. And somewhere, in a transport being redirected back to Earth, Carol sat with her hands folded in her lap and her markings blazing bright with hope. She'd kept her warmth. She'd shown up. and in doing so she'd taught the galaxy what one human had taught her. That love, even the simple love of showing up for coffee, could change everything. The sleeve that had hidden her farewell letter had instead revealed a manifesto, and the manifesto had become a movement, all because a bitter ex-pilot and an exiled medic had decided that Friday lunches were worth fighting for. 3 months later, the rain had returned to its normal Seattle schedule, which meant always and everywhere. But Ethan had stopped minding. The workshop had changed. Where once there were just tools and engines, now there were tables. Lots of them. Mismatched chairs collected from a dozen donations. A proper kitchen where volunteers prepared food for whoever walked through the door. The sign above the entrance read, HFY Cafe. Below it, in smaller letters, everyone shows up here. It was Friday, 11:47 in the morning, and Ethan was checking the coffee supply when the bell above the door chimed. He looked up. Carell stood in the doorway, her gray coat dripping with rain, silver eyes bright with something that might have been joy or relief or just the simple happiness of coming home. "The usual?" Ethan asked, though his voice was rough with emotion. "Please." She smiled, that same small smile he'd been seeing in his dreams for 3 months, though I have it on good authority that your coffee is terrible. Only the best for my most loyal customer. She crossed the space between them in 3 strides and pulled him into a hug that felt like breathing after being underwater too long. Around them, the cafe went quiet as people recognized her. The blue woman. The one whose message had changed everything. Then someone started clapping, then another. Within seconds, the entire cafe was applauding, and Carell was crying, and Ethan was holding her like he might never let go. "They released me," she said when the noise finally died down. "All of us. Emergency amnesty while they rewrite the protocols. I am free, Ethan. Actually free. I know, Voss called me 3 hours ago. I've been waiting ever since." She pulled back, wiping her eyes. "You should have told me you were opening this place. I would have helped." "You did help. You started it." She looked around the cafe, at the refugees and humans sharing meals, at the bulletin board covered in job postings and housing offers, at the small library corner where children from a dozen species read together. "This is not a workshop anymore," she observed. "No, it's a Friday ritual that got out of hand." He guided her to what had become her table, the one by the window. It had a small plaque now, reserved for the first Friday. "The city tried to shut us down twice, said we didn't have proper licenses. But then the protests started again, and somehow all our permits got approved overnight." "The power of terrible coffee," Carell said, "and stubbornness." Marcus appeared from the kitchen, carrying a plate with a perfectly grilled cheese sandwich. "Good to see you, Carell." "Marcus, you are free." "Thanks to you and your galactic broadcast. Turns out it's hard to justify imprisoning someone for helping refugees when half the planet is demanding refugee protections." He set down the sandwich. "Also, I work here now. Ethan's a terrible boss, but the coffee is worse, so it evens out." He left them alone, though Ethan noticed he wiped his eyes as he walked away. Carell took a bite of the sandwich and made a face. "I forgot how bad these are." "You love them." "I love the ritual." She met his eyes. "I love that you remembered, that you kept my table, that you built this place on the foundation of 26 Fridays." "It wasn't just me. Elena runs the refugee coordination. Mrs. Chen handles the food program. The Reeves family set up the legal clinic. This whole place is because people decided that showing up matters. Because you showed them it matters." Carell reached across the table, took his hand. "Ethan, I need to tell you something. The Orion Council wants me to return home, to serve as a liaison between our peoples, to help build the kind of peace that goes beyond treaties." His heart sank. "When?" "Not yet. Maybe not ever, if I do not wish it." She squeezed his hand. "But I wanted you to know that I am not tied here by circumstances anymore. If I stay, it is because I choose to." "And do you?" "Choose to stay." She smiled, and it was the brightest thing he'd seen in months. Where else would I go? Who else makes coffee this terrible? Who else would turn a workshop into a revolution? Karel. Besides, someone needs to teach all these new Friday regulars how to properly criticize your cooking. It is a sacred duty. They sat like that for a long time, hands linked across a table that had become holy ground. Around them, the cafe continued its work. People coming and going, stories being shared, connections being made. At one point, a young Orion boy approached their table shyly. "Are you the blue lady from the message?" he asked Karel in accented English. "I am. My mama says you saved us. She says you taught the humans to see us." Karel looked at Ethan, then back at the boy. "I did not teach them. They already knew how. I just reminded them." She knelt to the boy's level. "And do you know what the most important part is?" The boy shook his head. "The most important part is showing up. Every day, every week, every time someone needs you. That is how we change the world. Not with big speeches or grand gestures, but with consistency. With coffee and sandwiches, and being present." The boy nodded seriously, then ran back to his mother. "You are good with children," Ethan observed. "I was a medic. We learned to be good with everyone." She stood, moved to look out the window. "This view, I missed it, even the rain." "The rain missed you too. It was particularly moody while you were gone." She laughed, and the sound filled the cafe with warmth. That evening, after the last customer had left and they were cleaning up, Karel pulled something from her bag. The broken transmitter she'd used for her broadcast, now repaired. "I fixed it," she said. "Thought perhaps we could use it for the cafe, to share stories, coordinate with other refugees, build the network bigger. Or," Ethan suggested, "we could just keep making terrible coffee and see who shows up. Also a valid strategy." They finished cleaning in comfortable silence, the kind they'd perfected over 26 Fridays before the universe tried to tear them apart. When everything was put away, Ethan walked Karel to the door. "Same time next Friday?" he asked. "Same time every Friday." She paused at the threshold. "Ethan, I realize I never properly said it. Thank you for seeing me, for showing up, for teaching me that humans are capable of choosing kindness even when it costs them everything. Thank you for teaching me that some things are worth the cost." She hugged him again, and this time he noticed that her skin didn't feel as cold as it used to. Maybe she was warmer. Maybe he was. Maybe warmth was something that happened when two people decided to keep showing up for each other. After she left, Ethan sat alone in the cafe, looking at the empty tables that would fill again tomorrow. At the calendar on the wall that had every Friday marked with a small blue star. At the letter from Karel, framed now and hanging by the door so everyone who entered could read it. His comm unit buzzed. "Commander Voss. Cole, thought you should know. The Refugee Protection Act passed the Council tonight. Full citizenship pathways for anyone who's been here more than a year. It's not perfect, but it's a start." Because of her message? Because of both of you. Because you proved that the war didn't have to define us forever. Voss paused. "There's talk of making your cafe an official cultural heritage site, a monument to human-alien relations." "Please don't. It's just a coffee shop." "It's never just a coffee shop, Cole. But I'll tell them you declined the honor." Another pause. "For what it's worth, I'm glad I gave you those 6 hours." "Me too." The call ended and Ethan turned off the lights, locked the door, and walked home through the rain. Above him, the clouds parted just enough to show a single star, bright and blue and steady. He thought about Sarah and her journal, and her belief that love was choosing to lose. He thought about Karel and her sleeve letter, and her courage to broadcast hope when silence would have been safer. He thought about Marcus and Elena and all the others who'd decided that showing up was a form of resistance. And he thought about tomorrow, about next Friday, about all the Fridays to come where people would gather in a workshop-turned-cafe and prove that humanity wasn't defined by its wars, but by its stubbornness to keep caring anyway. Some wars are fought with weapons. Others are fought with coffee and kindness and the relentless determination to see each other as more than enemies. Ethan knew which war he'd rather win. Years later, when historians tried to pinpoint the exact moment when human-alien relations shifted from tolerance to genuine integration, they would point to Carell's broadcast, to the protests that followed, to the legislation that emerged. They would be wrong. The moment was smaller, quieter, more ordinary than that. It was a Friday ritual, a terrible cup of coffee, a blue woman and a broken man deciding that showing up for each other was worth any cost. It was love masquerading as lunch, and it saved the galaxy without ever firing a shot. In the end, that's what makes humanity impossible to defeat, not our weapons, or our technology, or our tactical brilliance. Our stubborn refusal to stop caring, even when caring is inconvenient. Our insistence on building bridges out of coffee breaks. Our absolute inability to let hate have the last word when kindness is still an option. We are beings who make terrible coffee and worse sandwiches, but we serve them with warmth that transforms everything it touches. And sometimes, just sometimes, that warmth is enough to change the universe, one Friday at a time. In the end, Ethan and Carell didn't save the galaxy with diplomacy or strategy. They saved it with the smallest, most stubborn act a sentient being can make, refusing to stop caring. Their story reminds us that sometimes humanity isn't a species but a decision we make again and again, especially on the days when it would be easier not to. So let me ask you, because stories like this only work when they echo inside someone else's chest, what warmth have you been carrying for too long without sharing? Who in your life needs you to show up, even if it's just with a terrible cup of coffee? And in a world that trains us to fear each other, what does choosing kindness, illogical, impractical, beautifully human kindness, actually cost? If you stayed all the way to the end, write Kal Shiva in the comments, so I know you're one of the few who keeps the warmth. Tell me which city or planet you're watching from. Subscribe to join this strange little community of humans who refuse to give up. Drop a like to fuel the algorithmic engines of the empire. Share this episode with someone who needs a Friday ritual. And don't forget to watch the next story appearing right now on your screen. After all, showing up is how we win every single time.